We go from the grasslands, one of which, the prairie, does seem to have some snowfall in the winter, and it is pretty cold, they said, to the savanna, which stays warm pretty much year-round. I mean, if 68 degrees is the low, I'd say that's warm pretty much year-round, to the coldest of all the biomes, the tundra. The tundra is the coldest of all the biomes. It also covers about 1/5 of the land on Earth, and boys and girls, that is huge. So between the grasslands and the tundra, we're starting to run out of space for other areas of terrestrial biomes. The word tundra is a Finnish word that means treeless plain. Treeless plain. So it's a good treeless area, and that's a good description of the tundra. The tundra is located in the Arctic Circle, which is the circle that surrounds the North Pole. But it's not the only place that we can find freezing cold temperatures in a few animals. In Antarctica and other cold environments, there are areas that can be described as tundra as well. We might find a little bit more plant and animal life in those areas, but do know that when we're talking tundra, we're talking extreme cold. So we've already established of the abiotic factors, sun, soil, water, and temperature, that the temperature is on the extreme cold side of things. Not only is it the coldest, it is one of the driest. It is only second to the desert in being one of the most dry areas on Earth. So when you're talking super dry, don't say desert right away until you hear the temperature. If they say it's the coldest and it's one of the driest, we're in the tundra. Very, very little rainfall. It rains less than 10 inches a year. Obviously, a majority of that's going to fall as snow. The winters are extremely long. So now we're talking a little bit more about the climate. Long, long winters. Very, very short summers. In the winter, it can get to a staggering 50 below Fahrenheit. Summer temperatures rarely get above 50 degrees. Now, I'm telling you, once you get into the 50s, it's starting to get cold. Now, 50 is well above freezing, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but it doesn't stay that way very long, especially once nighttime hits and things of that nature. That's just the high, and it doesn't happen often. In the summer, the soil becomes very, very soggy from all of the melted snow because the ground has permafrost. Now, we've said this word in class before, but permafrost is about, I'd say maybe half a foot underground, and it is frozen below that for most of the year. Sometimes the top layer of the permafrost thaws, but the bottom layer stays frozen all year, which keeps a lot of the moisture from rain being able to sink even deeper into the ground, and it keeps it up on the surface. And it makes it really, really smushy. It's almost like if you were able to have a giant sponge in your house. I mean, a huge sponge. Maybe it's like the size of our playground, and we could run across it. Right? Water would squish between our toes, and that's what it would feel like. And you'll get to see that in a really cool video we're going to watch soon. I don't know where it is in the tundra stuff, but we're going to learn about the Arctic bumblebee. Hopefully, at some point this year, you come across an animal or a plant, and you're thinking like kelp or something, or the mangrove trees. You're thinking, this has got to be the coolest thing ever. And then your mind is blown again later. The Arctic bumblebee is one of those things that I think will probably blow your mind. Very, very cool animal. But you got to remember, this soil can get really soggy, very, very squishy when it does get into the summertime. In order to live in the tundra, what would you have to adapt here? You've got to adapt to the extreme cold, and you have to adapt to the fact that there's not a lot of rain. So trees, not going to make it, mainly because it's super, super windy too. The trees just can't handle it, but their roots can't grow deep enough to get into enough water because of the permafrost. Grasses don't grow very well other than maybe in the summer. but we're going to have lichens and mosses and small shrubs that are lower to the ground. Plants that live in this permafrost soil, this soil is not good soil. Remember the good soil of the savanna and of the prairie? The soil here is not good. It's rocky, it's frozen, it's terrible for growing. In order to live in that permafrost soil, you have to be very short. You have to be able to group together so that you can survive the heavy winds. The growing season in the tundra is very, very short. It's only about 60 days. Imagine like spring is only 2 months and things grow and then it's all done. Tundra plants do get their energy from the sun through photosynthesis like other plants, but because of the tilt of the earth, the intensity of that sunlight is not as great as it is in other areas on earth. These plants have adapted to that. What they do is they don't use or need as much energy to survive, therefore they don't have to go through photosynthesis as much. So they have completely adapted. They have adapted to being short, not super deep roots, being able to survive on little to no water, not a lot of sunlight. These are some tough plants if you think about it. What about your animals? I mean, I know the first thing I think of when I see the tundra is the polar bear, but the animals that live here are super tough. They have adapted to super cold. They have adapted to not a lot of rain. And one of the main things they do is they do a lot of their breeding in the summertime. Some of them hibernate and try to sleep through as much of the super cold as they can, and that helps minimize their energy loss. We're going to find lemmings. You're going to enjoy those animals. There's a really great video about lemmings that we will watch. You'll see caribou, which are really neat, polar bears, Arctic hares, and the Arctic fox. We've talked about them before. We'll get to talk about them. Polar bears eat fresh meat, but they need a lot of fat. So they eat seals and walrus. So that's one thing that they're looking for. They'll also eat berries if they can find them during that short growing season. They'll steal eggs from a nest if they need to. So we've talked about the Arctic foxes. You'll find wolves there as well. There are some birds that live there, but they migrate. They leave when it gets super cold. Many, many animals of the tundra are migratory. That means that they move when it's too cold to another area. So that means that their population constantly changes. A food chain in the Arctic could be owls and foxes and polar bears as your top of the food chain, your mega predators. And of course, they're going to eat things like your lemmings, your Arctic hares, the caribou. There are mosquitoes in the summer. They're pretty terrible in the summer, as a matter of fact. The Arctic bumblebee, which is pretty awesome. And there's other insects as well that we might find. I think mosquitoes and the Arctic bumblebee are two of the coolest, though, because of the way that they survive that super cold up in the Arctic. I think it's amazing how they've adapted to all of that. I don't know what that was. There's like some really weird stuff that just started showing up on my screen. I'm not too sure what that was. Hopefully I don't mess up the video. So we have a lot of really cool animals in the Arctic. The Arctic bumblebee. I really enjoy this guy a lot. There he goes again. What is that thing doing? Bumblebees are cold-blooded. So you would not imagine that they would live in the Arctic in the coldest of all the biomes, but they have a very special adaptations to allow them to live there. On sunny days, you might see them out warming themselves, which is kind of cool. They're a lot more fuzzy than most bees. Even like a bumblebee that's already fuzzy, they're even fuzzier, which is kind of cool. They do find flowers, and they sit inside the flowers because those flowers are able to collect a little bit more of the sun's rays, and it almost magnifies the sun's rays onto the bee to help get its body temperature up, which is very cool. These bees have larger flight muscles than any of the other bees. They are actually have the ability to shiver like we do when we get cold. When we shiver so that we can make ourselves warm. Shivering is your body's way of moving your muscles very quickly, because when you move your muscles, you generate heat. So these animals are able to generate heat like that. And so you can see here, it keeps their temperature of 86 degrees, which is kind of crazy that they need to stay that warm. They can bring it up that high. So anyway, and you'll be able to see their thick fur when you watch the video of the Arctic bumblebees, which is here. And I definitely, again, don't skip this. Many people skip the nature boom time. You don't want to skip this. This is a great documentary on the Arctic bumblebee. How often do you get to study that? Not enough, probably. All right, we're going to stop there. We're going to stop there, and I will throw up the notes that you should probably have on the Arctic before we get done with this, if this thing will let me. Just to round it out, and I'm sure as we're continuing to take notes, you're starting to understand the things that are important. It's the biotic factors and the abiotic factors. So let's talk about the abiotic factors. Number one, the temperature is the coldest of all the biomes. Let's look at the water here. There's not a lot of it because this is the second most dry biome that we talk about, second to the desert. There's 2 seasons, super long cold winter and a very short summer. Plants have to adapt to the fact that the sun is not very intense here, and that's because of the tilt of the earth. Again, terrible soil, mainly because about 6 inches down there's something called permafrost, where the ground is permanently frozen. And in the summer, when it does thaw out a little bit, it can't, the water can't sink down into the soil like it does in normal places, so it becomes super, super soggy, which again, having too much water in an area is not good as well. To be an animal and live in this area is just as tough. You got to adapt to it being super cold. You got to adapt to not a lot of rain. It's totally white during the winter. You can't run around with a brown coat and thinking, hey, I've got this brown fur coat to keep me warm. That would not be a good thing. A wolf or an Arctic fox or a polar bear would see you from miles off, and they would stalk you and hunt you and eat you because they're predators. That's what they do. Many of the animals, I'm going to capitalize that. Many of the animals here hibernate. That means they just say, hey, I'm going to take a nap and go to sleep and let me know when this is over. Some of y'all do that in my class, which is not cool. No hibernating in Mr. B's class. So it's important for all that. Again, we learned about this amazing animal, the Arctic bumblebee. I hope you watched the video on that. Certainly don't skip over that, because you could easily get a paragraph about the Arctic bumblebee's adaptations in here, about your biotic factors, to make your Google Doc about this even more interesting. And I don't even mind you attaching that as your video when we finally work on our Google Sheets together. That would be a great one to put down for the Arctic. So those are our biotic and our abiotic factors for the tundra. We've now talked about the coldest place at all. So hopefully things start to get a little bit warmer for us. I think I know what's next. I think the taiga's next, which is still pretty daggum cold, but not as bad as the tundra. We get a few more trees. So we'll cover that, I guess, in our next lesson. Anyway, that's it. Smash the like button. Make sure you subscribe.